Hello there, welcome to Africa News, bringing you the top stories on the continent. Planning to return, Lesotho's exiled Prime Minister vows to go home after fleeing to South Africa, accusing the army of staging a military coup. Continuing the fight against Ebola, Nigeria confirms its third case of the virus outside of Lagos, while authorities in DR Congo mobilise against the seventh epidemic of the disease in 40 years. And as Cameroon readjusts to the rhythm of the rainy season, we take a look at one way people are beating the bad weather. First to our top stories. Southern Africa's regional body is to send an envoy and an observer team to Lesotho, where an apparent military coup over the weekend caused the Prime Minister to flee to South Africa. Thomas Tabane has since vowed to return home, but regional leaders have rejected his calls to deploy troops to help restore order. Unrest is thought to stem from a power struggle between Tabane and the country's Deputy Prime Minister, as Clovis Kasali reports.
The political situation in Lesotho is unclear, with a power struggle threatening its stability. On Saturday, Prime Minister Thomas Tabane fled the country after accusing the army of trying to overthrow him. He managed to reach South Africa just hours before soldiers had surrounded his residence. The military denied allegations of a coup, but the government called on the head of the army to clarify the situation. Soldiers have been carrying out raids against police stations, accusing forces of planning to arm political factions.
Lieutenant General Gamudi remains an important person in Lesotho society. We call upon him to respect the laws of Lesotho and to abide by the decisions of the command authority. We call on him to use his considerable influence to help defuse the situation and avoid further disruption and potential bloodshed.
On Saturday, Prime Minister Tabane fired General Kamoli, who in return refused to leave. Since June, Lesotho has been without a parliament after Tabane suspended it, as he feared a coup was in the making. His coalition government has suffered from tensions and divisions, with some of its members from army-backed opposition party LCD calling for parliament to convene. Experts believe such an option is risky for the embattled Prime Minister.
There is fear, I believe, on the side of the Prime Minister and his party, that if Parliament gets opened, the members of Parliament would pass a vote of no confidence against him and then probably have a change of government.
Tabane's entourage has announced he will return to the capital, Maseru, on Tuesday. Lesotho is a small enclave located in South Africa and home to some 2 million inhabitants. This mountainous state has suffered several military coups since gaining independence from Britain in 1966.
In other news, Nigerian health authorities have confirmed a third case of the Ebola virus in Port Harcourt, bringing the country's total confirmed infections to 16. Some 200 people are also under surveillance. A doctor in Port Harcourt died last week after treating a Liberian man infected with the first recorded case of the virus in Nigeria. While the World Health Organization has voiced concern about the unprecedented number of healthcare workers hit by the Ebola outbreak, meanwhile, in the DR Congo, authorities are mobilizing against the seventh epidemic of the virus in 40 years.
A government delegation in the Democratic Republic of Congo has traveled far to show its determination in the fight against the Ebola epidemic. The country is facing its seventh outbreak since the deadly virus was discovered in 1976 in Ekata province. At that time, the Boendi area was hit particularly hard. Medicine, protective material, and preventative measures are all essential to eliminating the outbreak. And authorities are first concentrating on hospitals in the area.
We have to give all personnel their protective material. Once we have broken the chain of transmission in the hospital and the chain of transmission in the community by giving the people the necessary information, the virus should, in theory, cease spreading and will stop there.
42 cases of the hemorrhagic fever have been confirmed in the DR Congo. 13 people have died from the virus, including 5 health workers. Measures to contain Ebola are highly expensive. Authorities say they need $4.5 million to fight the outbreak, and that figure could rise if massive quarantining is required.
The local people are already isolated, so we will need additional food aid for these people. There are around 50,000 inhabitants there, but that figure will rise if we have to expand the quarantine perimeter.
Authorities insist that the outbreak is confined to a small area of the country. Tests on suspected cases in Kinshasa and Katanga have come back negative.
Former Seleka rebels in the Central African Republic have ousted members who joined a new government, accusing them of high treason. The Seleka ex-coalition claims the government lacks respect for their movement. Interim President Catherine Samba-Panza unveiled the new government last week, hoping to revitalise the crisis-torn nation. Well, for more on this story, we can cross to Benedict Moran, who's in Bangui. Benedict, good evening to you. Is this ousting of ex-Seleka members likely to have an effect on the country's new government?
Absolutely. The consequences of this move could be quite dramatic, and it could be an important setback in efforts to end the fighting here. Remember, the Seleka are an alliance of rebel groups that overthrew the government last year and ushered in what is being called a brutal year of violence. In the peace process that followed, a transitional government was formed, and many Seleka members were included in this government, and they were also given key ministerial positions. Now, it's always been unclear what the level of support there was from the leadership of the Seleka, many of them who have fled to the north. Today, it's a clear signal from that leadership. The leadership has expelled all Seleka members who participated in the transitional government, and as you said, calling their participation high treason. So it casts doubt on the future of the government and its ability to survive, much less bring peace to this war-torn country.
Now, Benedict, amid all this unrest, what about the security situation in the country?
Well, the security situation in many parts remains extremely volatile. Fighting has flared up in many cities, particularly along the region dividing the north and the south. In one city in particular, where the Seleka have maintained now a new seat of power in Bambari, there is recent fighting that has displaced additional populations. Here in Bangui, it's mostly peaceful, but it's unpredictable, and there's still occasional fighting. Just last week, a number of people were killed in gun battles. One of the key unresolved issues that I'm hearing about is the enormous amount of weapons that are still floating around. Today, I spoke to a government official, and he said their key priority in the transition is to disarm some of these fighters who are still in the capital, some ex-Seleka fighters who are still in the capital. A number of them did leave today, but there are still thousands remaining, and it is a key source of instability, an important project for the future government.
Okay, Benedict Moran reporting for us from Bangui. Thank you. The International Criminal Court has postponed the hearing of Charles Blé Goudé at the request of his defence team. Goudé, an ally of Ivory Coast ex-President Laurent Gbagbo, is charged with crimes against humanity. Goudé is now set to appear in court on September the 29th. And finally, like every year during the months of July and September, Cameroon's economic capital is readjusting to the rainy season and, of course, the issue of recurring flooding. Accustomed to the period, though, residents in Douala are finding creative ways to cope. France 24's Coraline Molinier sent us this report.
A typical day during Douala's rainy season. Faced with the slightest amount of rainfall, the population is surrounded by water. In households, everyone has their own technique to keep dry.
When it begins to rain, I rearrange the cinder blocks under the chairs. Everything must be elevated. If we don't lift things up like this, they will all be soaked.
On their side, Bridget and her family raise the floor of their house slightly more and more each year.
When water comes now, it cannot enter again into my house. It just blocks outside. Then finally, the house is now too low. When I enter in the house, I must bend down before I enter because the house is low now.
Misery for some, opportunities for others. The kids in the neighborhood take advantage of the demand for sand to make a bit of money. And they aren't alone to exploit this rainy season.
It is like a mini job for us. If it rains, we carry people and they pay us.
At the heart of this informal economy lies a Chinese invention which boosts sales for these hawkers, the motorbike umbrella.
Now with the umbrellas, motor taximen have an advantage. Even if it is pouring, they can work every day to feed their families. Personally, I would prefer if it rained all year long to improve my business.
Located in one of the most rainy areas in the world, on marshy land, the economic capital of Cameroon finds it hard to stay above water. Due to housing shortages, entire neighborhoods have been built on flood zones, sometimes even directly on the water drainage system, like the case of this building destroyed by the urban community. The regional delegate for housing has urged individual responsibility.
I would advise all those who would like to build to consult the urban community in order to be guided towards the zones where they must build. Swamps are not appropriate for house building. Also, it is strictly prohibited to build on drains. This is for the population's security.
In 2012, Douala created a new urbanization and sanitation plan. However, with a demographic growth rate of 5% per year, the anarchical housing continues to spread and to hinder drainage water circulation.
Right, you're up to date. Your Africa team is back tomorrow. Do join us then.